Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Bill Treasurer wants to discuss leadership 2 words at a time. Let's find out why. Bill, thanks for being with us today.
Bill, what a pleasure to be with you again. It's been a while, and I look forward to sharing some secrets of success.
Well, you definitely have a lot of good words in this book, but first I want you to explain the title, Leadership, 2 words at a time. What does that mean?
Well, I found in my executive coaching, and I do a lot of executive coaching, that over the years, that if a coachee and I were working on some challenging, perplexing problem, that if I could help them narrow it, and sort of name it, and if they're in the fewest amount of words, that they would be much more likely to come to some sort of an action to remedy the situation that they were dealing with. So I'll give you a quick story, Bill. I was working with an executive who was wanting to become a partner at Accenture. At the time, that was where I was working. And he was an associate partner, and he was hungry to become a partner, except that the partners told me that he's too intense. He wants it too badly. He's kind of desperate. Can you work with him with coaching? So in coaching, I said to this individual, I said, Steve, what do you think it is that the partners are wanting that you're not yet demonstrating before you could become a partner? And he was quiet for a minute. And then he said, I think I would be calm and I would be confident. And it was exactly what he would need. If he could become calm and confident, sort of composed, and yet knowing who he is and be confident, he could get to partnership, and he would be able to sort of not give off that intensity vibe. And in fact, what happened was he started to go to meetings, and then he would text me a little message. Hey, Bill, I'm getting ready to go be around the partners. CC, I'm going to be working on my CC, and that stood for calm confidence between us.
I'll always remember that now.
Exactly. And it taught me something, right? A lot of times when we're working with people, we feel like we've got to complexify it, we've got to nuance it to death, and but sometimes we just have to help that person simplify something. And if the fewest amount of words possible, they're much more likely to, in fact, take action on it. And over a 10-year period of time, I started cataloging different 2-word concepts that were related to leadership that I thought were powerful enough that for a new leader in particular, they would be memorable. And then that leader, instead of being burdened by leadership, if they could just simplify it and get on with the 2 things that are right in front of them, the 2-word concept, that they'd be more successful. So that's the genesis.
Now, you mentioned working at Accenture. When you were there, you were actually training people who, in effect, were your bosses, if I'm correct, and like 35 or 40 of them. Is that right?
Yeah. When I moved into the role, I remember my boss said to me, all right, Bill, I got the sponsorship for the role. It's, and it was, they had never done it before because, all of their consultants were external client facing, working with clients. But here they were going to have me in an internal role, working with what I thought were going to be middle managers like I was. And so my boss said, we're getting ready to roll out the role. We got the sponsorship. We got the budget for it. And you'll start working with the partners on Monday. And I said, wait a minute. My boss's name was Heinz. I said, Heinz, you just said partners. I know you made a mistake. I just, wanted to kind of point that out. I'm going to be working with the managers. He said, no, you're going to be working with the partners. I said, Heinz, they all outrank me. I'm a middle manager. They all have way more leadership experience than I do. They've got more seasoning. I can't coach them. And Bill, he said the only thing that he could have said to me that freed me up and gave me mental permission to move into the role. And he was the most senior guy. All of these partners reported to him. He said, Bill, you coach me all the time. And he was right. We had that kind of relationship. So it freed me up. I moved into that role. I coached a bunch of people who outranked me. I learned a ton about leadership in that experience. And I think I got a little bit better as things went along.
That really must be another book all in itself, coaching people above you. That it's easy for us to look down because our underlings are reporting to us. They have to listen to us to a certain degree. They could quit if they really don't like us, but they have to listen for a few days. But the people above you, these are 35 bosses, and you're kind of under the microscope continually in that role. So you must be doing something right. Let's put it that way.
Well, I found, you know what I found, Bill, is that so much of executive coaching is not telling. It's asking. It's really listening and asking good questions, because it's not about me providing clarity to them. It's about me helping them get to clarity. And a lot of times that's about me sort of just asking the questions that help them think about things that are right in front of them that they often don't.
Who is the best person to be reading this book? We want everybody to read it, but is it aimed at that top ranking manager, the first time manager, the foreman?
You know, Bill, don't those guys get enough help? The senior executives, I mean, most leadership books of all time have been written for senior executives. They're already experienced. We're just helping them get more entrenched in their roles. I think of a book like Good to Great. I mean, that's a really, really fantastic book if you're a senior leader. But for the rank and file new leader, no, that's a neglected audience. And yet it's the vast amount of people who are leading are newer leaders. It's as you go up the pyramid in an organization, there's few and fewer leaders. They may become more powerful and more powerful, but there's far more new or newer leaders. And so I wrote this book. A lot of the senior leaders, Bill, will complain that when they got into a leadership role, nobody handed them a playbook. They had to sort of figure their way out and flounder through it. And I thought, well, then somebody needs to write the playbook. So I wrote this book with the new leader in mind. What's been super gratifying, though, is that people that are senior leaders who've read it said, you know what, I got stuff out of this book, too. But it's written for the new leader.
And it really is a good book for someone who's going to be a new leader. And whether that means you're a principal in a church, in a school, in the educational world, the academic world, or a religious leader, this is a book, Leadership 2 Words at a Time, that I think everybody should take a look at, because you also ask some probing questions. And even if the leaders just kind of sneakily skip the chapter and go back to the questions at the end, if they answer them truthfully to themselves, I think they'll get an enormous amount out of that and certainly be better leaders. And again, if you can train leaders who outrank you, and as we said, 35 of them, you must know what you're doing. You're telling them the right stuff. Now, you mentioned in the book that progress demands momentum, and momentum turns on the engine of urgency. Can you translate that? What does that mean?
Well, leadership is never about stagnancy. We put leaders in place because we want them to take us to a better place than we reside today. And that means momentum and movement. They take us from point A to point B. Sometimes it's hard because we got to release from point A. We might not even like point A, but it means entrusting them so that they can take us to point B. And that means movement, momentum, progress. And leaders, really the senior leaders in an organization, they're in a hurry. They are impatient and they have a lot of urgency. And if you're not working with urgency, it's not going to help your career. So you've got to be moving forward, moving in a positive direction, adding value all the time, and doing it with a certain clip in your step if you want to be in the seat that they are in someday.
That's a good point. Adding value all the time. Now, I read in your book, and this took me back a little bit because I said, maybe Bill's getting a little too strong on this point. You say the consequences of failure are catastrophic. And I would think that statement would go with either a pilot, a policeman, or a doctor. Can you explain how that applies to management?
Yeah, right. I know. Sometimes. Sometimes you got to startle the reader a little bit.
Well, you did. It worked.
So the vast amount, yes, after Accenture, I started my own company, and that was 20 years ago. And it just happened that over time, I started to work with a lot of construction companies. And I've got probably 5 construction company clients and others that we're in the works of talking about developing programs for them right now. And in construction companies, I mean, if you get it wrong, if you've seen a bridge failure a couple of years ago, there was one in Pittsburgh. That's a construction company. It's on them, right? Anytime you see like a parking lot get flattened or some mess up, or even just building those jobs, you might see a crane fall over, or there are safety incidences oftentimes that move towards fatalities. Fatalities happen in that industry. So I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that with the leaders that I work with. I did a webinar before you and I started talking today. It was on psychological safety for one of my construction company clients. And in those companies, safety, physical safety, is a premium. And those leaders are under a lot of pressure. They're leading jobs sometimes that are in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And if they get it wrong, it is consequential.
You've convinced me. And I'm going to be thinking of you every time I go over a bridge or look at a very large building and say, gee, I hope they took Bill's course and I hope they read the book, Leadership 2 Words at a Time. Bill, at this point in the show, I want to let our listeners know that they're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest today is Bill Treasurer. He is the author of Leadership 2 Words at a Time. Bill, we're going to ask you, one, where we can get the book, and also if there's a website where we can get more information.
Sure. You can get the book at any one of your online retailers, and you can get in touch with me and my company at couragebuilding.com. Those would be the easiest things to do. And by the way, Bill, I have to say, as a guy who grew up in Westchester County, 18 miles from Manhattan, in a little town called Larchmont, it's great to hear your accent.
I thank you so much. I'm glad somebody likes it out there. I'm always impressed by other people's tone and accents, as you say, or twangs, but I'm glad somebody likes that. Bill, obviously this is very important. Thinking it's so rare that I hear someone say, boy, my boss is so good. It's usually a complaint. I'd say 9 out of 10 times, or he or she really knows their business, or that principal or that leader, etc. But you say something like 80% of organizations say it's important to develop new leaders, but only 5% really do so. That's 1 out of 20 if my math is still functioning pretty well. What can be done about it, or should we go out and read your book immediately because they're not going to do it for us?
Well, that's always good advice.
See the good lead-in I've given you? I'm trying to sell books.
So it is startling, isn't it? And that came out of a report from an organization called DDI that specializes in organizational development types of programs. And it's a really striking statistic. And I think part of it is because the vast majority of businesses in the United States are small businesses, and they don't have the capital to be able to institute a formal and comprehensive leadership development program. That said, there are smaller things you can do. I mean, you know, certainly starting your own little book club at your if you have a small business, and passing that book around, having a lunch and learn where you task somebody on the team with learning something about leadership and then coming back and presenting it at the next lunch, and then that rotates around your team. Being able to occasionally sponsor people to go outside of your company, to go to a seminar that might be in your local community, or bring in a neighbor, somebody who's known and prominent as a small business owner that you know and are networked to, that has an insight you'd like them to share. So there's things that you can do, even if you don't have a formal leadership development program, but you shouldn't abdicate the responsibility of empowering your people and helping them, involving them on decisions and building the team and sharing knowledge about leadership. It's any business owner's responsibility.
Now, you say that leaders make things harder than they have to. That, again, I would think would be the opposite. If anything, maybe they don't give us enough instruction what to do or how to follow through or how to follow up, etc. Why is that, to your experience?
I think that leaders get in their own way a lot. And they, for a few things. First of all, they think that they need to have all the answers. And so they are very directive and very one way in their communications. And sometimes they'll be dismissive of people who maybe have less experience or haven't been in the workforce as long. And sometimes their ears shut down. They get a little fossilized as time goes on. And with a little bit, I give you an example, Bill. I remember one time I was speaking to one of my construction company clients. There were about 300 people in the room. I was doing a keynote. I asked the owner of the company, whom I've worked with for a long time, to please come up on the stage. And I had a quick interview with him about leadership. And I asked him, and this guy's a hard driving guy. This is the guy who's a take charge, old fashioned, command and control, deep voice kind of guy. And I asked him, and now he's about 70. I said, what's something you appreciate now about leadership that you didn't fully appreciate early on? And the word that he said was humility. because I felt like I was in such a rush, in such a hurry to get something done. I had to drive everybody else. And I think I didn't listen enough to the input of the very people that I had hired to be my experts. And I didn't tap into their expertise enough. So I think that one way that leaders get in their own way is feeling that they have to have all the answers when they got plenty of good answers around them, even from inexperienced people. That's just one example, but there's plenty of ways that that leaders get in their own way, and ego sometimes has a big part of it.
I would think that's about 90% of it, but you would know better, obviously. Now, if things weren't tough enough, and you said we only have 5% who are perhaps getting involved in terms of companies, now we've just added to the pile of problems, and you mentioned in the book, remote leadership. We're doing it or trying to do it from home. Our leaders are at home. What can you tell us, or is that your next book?
Well, what's interesting about that topic, Bill, is that it's probably the most common topic right now in the COVID and post-COVID generation, that this became so prominent that literally, if you do a Google search, you will get over 1 billion references to remote leadership. I know because I checked as I was writing my book. And beyond that, when I was back at Accenture, we were doing remote leadership way back then, because you might remember when call centers started to offshore outsource. So when call center work was being offshored for outsourcing, that becomes the moment where explosive remote leadership started to take place. And that's 20 years ago. So this is not a new concept. It became way more prevalent in the COVID era. What I would say is, yes, it's hard. Let's acknowledge that. It's really hard to onboard people onto your team. It's hard to do team building with your team. But your responsibility to check in with every individual on your team doesn't go away. That has to happen if you've got an in-person team or a virtual team. You've got to be vigilant when you're watching your virtual team. You've got to make sure that they are not overworking, because that's what people think, that they're going to goof off, that we need butts and seats, that I need to be watching them all the time. You don't. In fact, it's very often the opposite, that they're working too much, too hard while they're at home, and it's interfering with their home life, and they're becoming out of balance. And you've got to be a leader who's vigilant and checking in with that at the individual one-on-one level. And I think that that's probably the most important thing. And that you've got to make sure that you're making metering it and being responsible about creating some space in your own calendar, so you're not getting oversaturated with your, sort of remote duties, if you will.
Just another checkbox for that leader that they're going to need. I copied down a quote from your book. You say, "If nothing changes, nothing changes." Did I get that right, or did I misread it?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite quotes. And I often start it with in the leadership programs that I deliver and design and develop. When I got, 30 leaders in a room, I remind them, your company is investing in you. You're going through this program. If you expect to come out of this program the very same person who walked in, then either the program failed or you haven't engaged with it, and nothing changes if nothing changes. So if you want to get something out of this program, you got to be willing to embrace change. It's a great quote.
No, I love it, and it just as I had to ask you for an explanation, it makes people think, which I'm sure that's what you want them to do, and to get on board with what you're talking about. At the end of each chapter, you add some questions, and I love that part of it because it made me think, say, how would I answer that? One of the questions that impressed me, you asked people at the end of your career, what impact did you want to have, or did you have? I guess it's looking to the future a bit. What kind of answers do you get? By
far, the most common answer that I get is when a person starts thinking about what is the legacy that they would like to leave with their leadership. It's about the impact that they'll have on other people, that they've left people better off than they found them. A lot of people will say that I have helped other people become leaders along the way. And it's the rare individual who doesn't give that answer, who says that, I created a building or I amassed amount of wealth, right? It's always about the impact that they had on others. And I think too, that if a leader reflects, yes, on the leader that they would like to become, to leave that kind of impact, and think about the people that you might be able to impact in a positive way for the trajectory of their entire career. I think that same leader can point to somebody who did that for them, who opened doors of opportunity. I could tell you, Bill, I wouldn't be on this, we wouldn't be having this conversation, or at least you wouldn't be having it with me, if it wasn't for a specific leader who opened doors of opportunities for me. He's the guy who gave me permission to move into that leadership coaching role, who told me that I coach him, because I did. And he's a mentor to me today. And that's 22 years later since I've worked with him and for him. So I think that that's the most common answer I hear about is legacy.
We're getting a lot of gems from here, and of course that obviously makes great sense. Bill, before going ahead, once again, I want our audience to know that if you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan. Our guest today is Bill Treasurer. He is the author of Leadership, 2 Words at a Time. And again, Bill, we're going to ask you the website and where we can get the book.
Sure. So the website is couragebuilding.com, and you can find the book at any one of your online retailers. In fact, you can find it in the airport bookstores right now, because I've seen it a couple of times when I go through O'Hare.
I love those, and I think for any leader, wow, you can really make that plane trip worthwhile if you grab hold of Bill's book, Leadership, 2 Words at a Time. You're going to come out with some ideas, and whether it's just for conversation, whether to get you thinking in a mild way, it's not going to hurt you. It's not going to scare you to death or say, you have some rare disease. It's just going to wake you up to what's important and what might take you from that average leadership role to literally right to the top. In one of the chapters, you talk about knowing yourself, and you say, and I love this statement, I'm going to be stealing it for other lectures, know what makes you tick and what ticks you off. What type of response do you get from people with that? What makes future leaders tick? And is there something that they all have in common that gets them annoyed?
Well, I think that, most people will say, when it comes to what makes them, what ticks them off oftentimes is somebody else not performing, right? It's somebody else not doing the thing that you wanted them and expected them to do. That's the thing, is the human frustration. I think it's really important that leaders, that chapter, right? So I start the whole book, really, it's the first major principle of self-leadership, and that is self-knowledge. Know thyself is Socratic. The idea that if you expect to lead other people, you've got to be a good leader of yourself. And you can't lead yourself if you don't know who you are. You got to know what you're good at. You got to know where your talents are. You got to know what you're passionate about. And then, you could say you've got to know your weaknesses. I mean, that's easy. But what's more interesting is you've got to know what the overuse of your strengths causes. It causes a shadow. I call it sunshine and shadows. So you got something you're good at. So, for example, I've been doing leadership programs for 25 plus years. I'm pretty good on my feet. I'm pretty good in front of an audience. But if I've got to have the sunshine on me all the time because I like being entertaining of people, then that's going to suck the air out of the room for somebody else who might need to step up and start to assert those skills. Or if I'm a person who's really driven and I'm great at getting results and getting things done, but I bowl over people to get my way all the time, the good thing turns into a bad thing. So anybody's strengths, when it's overused, like we talk about, I'm a critical thinker. That's great. You're a critical thinker. But sometimes a critical thinker becomes a critical person, pointing out holes in everybody else's work and bores the holes into their mistakes. So strengths are good. You got to have self-knowledge about what you're good at and where you need to situate yourself, because it's good for those skills. But you also need to know what happens when you overuse that strength. And I call it sunshine and shadows.
I love that part about what is your sunshine, because, of course, that draws you in. We have to ask you the follow-up question. And effectively, you've answered its strengths and what makes us a good leader. Am I correct?
Yeah. Strengths are the things that make us a good leader, and that we should put ourselves in situations that nurture those strengths and bring them out and amplify them.
At the end of another chapter in your book, you have questions at the end of each chapter, and you ask people why they're fit to lead. And again, these are new leaders coming up, new managers, leaders, etc. Do they tell you they were captain of the track team in 1999 or 2008, or do they go back and say, well, I was class president? Or what kind of responses do you get there, and what does that usually bring out and do for the leader?
sometimes they've never considered the question before. And I drop the question because I want them to think about it. Like, some people are moved into leadership roles because somebody else put them in that direction, and they had no appetite for it. They had no desire for it, but somebody else thought they could do it and moved them into it. Maybe that person did that out of necessity. There was a hole in the organization, and they patched it up by putting this person who never wanted to be there in the first place. And it's good for a person to know that. But I asked the question because most of the time, for the person who did seek out a leadership role, what was it? Was it the fact that, I think having an athletic background is terrific. It teaches you about drive. It teaches you about ambition. It teaches you about competitiveness. It teaches you about focus. It teaches you about personal discipline. It should teach you how not to be a sore loser. So you learn great lessons through athletics. But I think it's the reason I asked the question is I just want them to think about it. What is the impulse that made them want to lead in the first place? And why do they think that they're fit to lead? Because your leadership fitness is what's going to give everybody else confidence in following your lead. And without being confident in your leadership, you're not fit to lead, and you'll be removed from leadership.
Well, that's certainly something, obviously, if we get there, we don't want to be knocked out of there. Finally, something that you mentioned in there, you say integrity matters. Is that a word leaders still know today? We just see so much where there's a lack of integrity. Let's put it nicely. Yeah,
Bill, I think it's so central. I wanted to put stuff in this new book for the new leader who just might not have ever been introduced to some of this stuff. So I've got, a story from Dante. I talk about Dionysus in the book. I talk about Damocles in the book, because some of that ancient wisdom has some great things for us to think about. But the story about Dante, and I won't go into the story, but it gets them to start to think about their own value system. And it's the leaders who say one thing and do another. We didn't like it in our parents, and we don't like it when we see it in another human being. And we definitely don't like to see it in our leader, is a person who's walking outside of their integrity. I think congruency matters. My stated value system, first of all, do you know your values? Which is why I go back to know thyself. You got to know what you care about, what you stand for, what you stand against. And then you have to embody those values. And if you state them and other people, you tell these are my important values, but then you're walking outside of them and you're becoming incongruent, it's bad for you. It's really deadly to your leadership. So yes, I introduced the new leader to the idea of character and integrity and values and principles, because when in all the crazy that you're going to deal with, and let's face it, Bill, man, what a crazy world we're in right now.
Exactly.
That values and principles and integrity and character help you get through. It helps center you in the with all the insanity around you. It at least keeps you sane.
Bill, we want our listeners to know the book is Leadership, 2 words at a time. Real quick, the website again?
CourageBuilding.com. And Bill, what a pleasure to be with you again.
Love it. We have a good time, and please put us on your list when the new book, whatever it will be, and I know you'll write another one. And I want our audience to remember your name. It's Bill Treasurer, which certainly fits in with the business aspect, and it's a person we're never going to forget. In the book, Leadership, 2 words at a time. We want our audience to know that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan. Please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.